Yeah, so this is some work that we did funded by the Deep South National Science Challenge over the last couple of years. It's a collaborative project between mostly Lincoln University and NIWA, and as Pike said, we've got Christian Zammit here who will present some of the hydrological analysis as well, because that's beyond my expertise. So it's quite an interdisciplinary project with economists, kind of adaptation to climate change specialists and hydrologists. So really we're interested in real options analysis because climate change is uncertain. So although we have quite good understanding about some of the projections, there's still a lot we don't know about the timing, magnitude and location of changes. And some of you might have heard of this cascade of uncertainty, which is the idea that with every layer of analysis, we actually add an extra layer or part of uncertainty to it. So by the time we start thinking about adaptation, we've got a really wide envelope of uncertainty that we need to handle. And this makes decision making difficult. In New Zealand, we have this because we have the 4 internationally used representative concentration pathways, which kind of simulate future pathways of emissions of our greenhouse gases and what that might mean for the climate. Then in New Zealand, we have 6 global climate models that we use to simulate what climate impacts might be. Then we use these in regional climate models. And in this project, we're using the regional climate models as input into hydrological models. So we have, because of the 6 climate models and the 4 RCPs, we have a 24-member ensemble of potential futures, which basically means there are potentially 24 different futures that we need to consider when we're thinking about climate change. Some types of analysis just use one, but that might be the wrong one, and then you're left making the wrong decisions that you might be left with the consequences of for a long time. So real options analysis, it's been around, as some of you probably know, for quite a while in the financial economics area, but in the last 10 or so years, it's become increasingly applied to adaptation to climate change decisions. And it's particularly suited for specific contexts, which are when we have large irreversible investments, or at least partially irreversible. So where what we do now is going to be around for a long time into the future. So things like infrastructure lend themselves quite well to real options analysis. It's the idea that we leave options open in the future, so then we have the right but not the obligation to act on these options. It builds on cost-benefit analysis. In many ways, well, a large part of it is a cost-benefit analysis, but includes this value of flexibility and allowing for this range of climate futures. And this is where it's different from traditional appraisal tools that usually assume one fixed path for future investment. It's a little confusing because quite a few techniques actually fall under the real options analysis umbrella, but the one that we use here in this project is the decision tree approach, which is probably the most straightforward, certainly for someone like me who isn't an expert in these kind of techniques. So we've applied it to the case of water storage because we know water availability is going to become an important issue. Well, it already is, but it will become more important under climate change. We're looking at the primary sector because, as we're all agricultural resource economists here, we know it's so important for the economy. And water storage is an important adaptation to uncertainty. It allows us to smooth out that variability in supply, but it's a significant investment, and we don't want to over-invest if we don't need to. We use a site in Canterbury as an example. The catchment is a real catchment, and Christian will talk to you about that. But the actual assumptions we make about the land use and the farm and even whether the storage is considered is entirely hypothetical. So we don't want to get caught up in any sort of politics there because it is quite contentious. So our research question is, what is the most cost-effective size to build a reservoir so that we can maintain our current production into the future, but with the option to extend the reservoir if we need to in the future in a way that minimises the expected lifetime cost of the system? So the benefits here are the future production of the land with irrigation compared to if we didn't have it. And the costs are obviously the costs of construction and maintenance, the opportunity costs of the land potentially, and the cost of extending the reservoir if we need to in the future. And we want to avoid both under or over investment. So under investment is if we don't have enough water in the future, and over investment is if we built it too big and we've wasted all that money, and then it turns out we've actually got a lot more water than we thought we would have. So the hydrological, well, the ROA process consists of a lot of hydrological analysis. And Christian will talk to you about how they did this, but they identified the water storage requirements under all of these RCP GCM combinations for every year out to 2019. And we construct a decision tree with 2 decision points. So that's our decision and the current time, well, when we started the project, which was 2018, and then another point in time which we chose as 2050. Depending on the analysis that you're doing, or that whoever, you can choose different, obviously different decision points and more decision points. But the more decision points you have, the more complex the analysis will be. So Christian and his team identified 4 different storage sizes to build potentially in 2018 that would cover the requirements out to 2049, and then another 4 sizes to cover the range of water availability required from 2050 to 2090. And from that we construct a decision tree with 256 branches, because it's 4 to the power of 4 of those storage sizes. And so it looks a little bit like this. This is just part of the tree. So this box here on the left is one of those initial storage sizes. And then if we built that, then we'd have 4 potential outcomes in 2049, according to the distribution of the scenarios. And each of those we would then construct the 4 storage sizes from 2050 that would take us out to 2090. And for each of, and then we'd have 256 potential outcomes in 2090. And then we carry out a cost-benefit analysis of each of those branches. And we also need to calculate the expected net present value as well as the next net present value. So we need to assign probabilities to each of the branches as well. And Christian will talk about how we did that, which was quite an innovative approach in New Zealand anyway to do that. And once we've got the expected net present value of each of the branches, then we do a backward induction. So we work backwards to identify the pathway that has the highest expected net present value, and that will determine what size and time we need to build the storage sizes. So we made some really quite rough assumptions, I guess, about our parameters. I spoke to some construction contractors about the price of building these things. We used a milk price, $6 per litre, but we did work around the sensitivities of these and the discount rate as well, which I'll talk about when I come back. But now I'm going to pass over to Christian for a bit more detail on the hydrological modelling.
Thanks, Anita. Everyone hear me fine? Okay. So as Anita indicated, we decided to look at a case study that was looking just at a farm and looking at the issue of storage on the farm, not extending to a central repository of storage that will then after look at the distribution. So the analysis, so the location was chosen based on the information produced by NIWA for MPI back in 2019, and we were looking at a potential location that is currently experiencing water stress, and where future water stress was going to be exacerbated by a certain amount across all the RCPs. Next one, Anita. Sorry, the farm is located in a mid-elevation of the Mackenzie Basin between on the Rangitata River. So how do you size a reservoir? Usually you do this based on water demand, water availability, and reality of supply. So in terms of water demand, we made a certain number of assumptions about the size of the farm, that the irrigation was going to happen between September to April, and it's always going to be between September to April, even during climate change. And we apply a 90% efficiency to meet a soil moisture deficit. We have a certain stock rate, so we need to provide water for the cows for them to be able to drink. And because we are in Canterbury and we're trying to anchor it to a real application, we were looking at using current water allocation rules in Canterbury, which are more or less stringent depending on where you are. In terms of water availability, that's water which is in the stream. Next one, please. Then after, how you determine the reliability of supply. Well, you are playing with 4 different factors which are the severity, the frequency, the duration, and the timing for each of the event and each of the year, that then after you collapse into an average over the time periods that you consider. And your criteria is that 80% of the time you are going to be able to meet your reliability. This avoids dimensioning to over dimensioning at a really small scale that will increase the cost terribly. Next one. So as Anita indicated, we had to come up with a way to represent this ensemble modeling and potential future. And that's one of the biggest challenge in terms of adaptation. We can produce a large number of numbers, but then after how those are converted into something which is that can be discussed, agreed, and that can be put into a strategy is a big question. And unfortunately, there is not a single approach. Anything that you can think about, people have looked at it and people have been using it. So they can either say, okay, all the future are equiprobable, or we are going to base it on the potential rainfall distribution into the future, or we are going to make a choice in terms of the RCP, the best one. What we decided to do is we decided to outline a range of potential or plausible pathway, and by this we mean trajectory, to be able to take a decision on key decision variable. And this allows us to make some preconceived probability on the realization of GCM and RCP. And we look at 2 different scenarios, one where everything is probable just in terms of the future direction, or where we were believing that the good news and the extreme bad news are potentially less probable. And as a result, we collapse all those 24 different features into 4 non-overlapping hydrological conditions that were associated with storage reservoir. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Christian. Do you want to talk about these, or shall I?
Oh, no.
These were just our initial results of the water storage requirements, and the point really is to show that there's quite a lot of variability for each of the GCM RCP combinations, especially as we go out to 2090. But when we come to the real options analysis results, and I know I don't have a lot of time left, when we assumed the RCPs were equiprobable, as Christian explained, which by the way was quite an innovative piece of work, and it took us a while to get to the point of being able to assign probabilities like that. The optimal sequence was to build the smallest reservoir in 2018 and again in 2050. And so this just shows that the benefits of having the more available water didn't outweigh the costs of construction, or didn't justify the larger construction sizes. But when we looked at the distributed probabilities, so we assumed that the worst case and the best case were less likely, it actually changed our decision. So that in that case, we would choose at the second largest construction size in 2018, but go back to the smaller option in 2050. So just quickly, I guess here, so for all of the quartiles, that the choice was the same to build the smallest size in 2018 and again in 2050. But just, I guess the interesting thing to point out here is we compared the expected MPV with the expected MPV if we'd chosen the worst case, so building the largest reservoir, and you can see that there's quite a significant difference there. And there's sensitivities around those parameters. So if we had a lower discount rate, it led us to choose a larger reservoir. If the milk price was higher, again, it led us to construct a larger reservoir. So just some points, I guess, reflecting on, we really wanted to use the method and then to demonstrate how we could use it in this context. So the results are quite specific to this particular example, but it does highlight that the probability distribution is important. That's one of the criticisms of ROA, but I still think it is an improvement on existing traditional methods which don't even consider alternative futures. This type of analysis lends itself to many other types of situations where we have those one-off investment types. And you can also try different things. So instead of what we did, you could also defer action altogether or use it to identify whether you should abandon your project, for example. And you can tie it in with other types of analysis, more qualitative analysis perhaps. And yeah, we just, I think we wanted to do this because we really recognise that with climate change and adaptation, we do need to think about new ways of thinking and learning and new kind of tools to help us do that. So I'll stop there. I'm conscious it's quite long, so thank you.